Hello and welcome to 2024. And the question is, what is in store for us over the next 12 months? Well, we can't be sure, of course, but in all things we can take confidence from the fact that our sovereign God reigns, and as Job declared, he knows the way that I take. That said, there are a number of issues and events that we can expect to play a significant part in shaping 2024. And who better to walk us through them than our head of research, Dave Greatorex. Dave, we have to start, I think, with the election, or the expected election. There's almost certainly going to be a UK general election in 2024. The CI is a registered charity, so I'm not going to ask you which way you're going to vote, or I'm not going to ask you to make any prediction about the outcome. I'm not even going to ask you when you think the election is going to happen, but I am going to ask you how you anticipate that whatever the result, how it might shape our issues.
Well, it's a big question, isn't it? The timing is a factor in how it shapes the issues, actually. An earlier election would perhaps curtail some of the things we're going to be talking about. But I think most people still think that the election's more likely to be later in the year, maybe October onwards. So probably won't be a factor in stopping any of the bills that we're going to come on to discuss. Irrespective of when the election comes, we will be doing what we always do, which is produce our election briefing. Yeah. And what we try to do through that briefing is, again, we're not saying which way people should vote, but we're covering a whole series of issues that are within our remit and within broader Christians' concerns.
Because one of the things we really want to encourage people to do is to use their vote.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a real privilege living in a democracy to be able to participate in who is Caesar. So we have that biblical principle of rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. But we in a democracy get to have a say in who Caesar actually is. And so it's a true privilege that we should be exercising. We need to do that with Christian wisdom. And we need to know what the parties stand for, what the candidates stand for.
On the issues that we're interested in. So
That's
it's just
right.
kind of, if people aren't familiar with it, it's probably just worth pointing out to them that, we're not going to be saying things particularly about taxation levels about the rate at which inflation should come down or any of that sort of stuff.
That's right.
There's a limited range of issues that we look at.
We try and identify those things that we believe are the closest to the Ten Commandments, the issues that we work on, and we try and show the party positions. I mean, obviously, as individual voters, you're not actually voting for the party, you're voting for an individual candidate to represent you. And that's also something to think about. So it might be that actually there's a candidate who you feel would better represent your views, even if they're standing for a party you wouldn't naturally vote for. And that's something to weigh up as well.
And we're going to come on to some of the issues which we're likely to cover when we produce that briefing. But there's also speculation that there could be an election in the Republic of Ireland in 2024. It doesn't need to be one until I think it's March 2025, but there's speculation there could be one. Sinn Féin is one of the major parties north and south of the border, and they are already sort of talking about 2024 as the year when the Irish government begins to plan for Irish reunification. Of course, that would be a massive development, and I mean, it's too early to sort of speculate on that sort of thing, but that would be something we'd have to pay close attention to, right?
Sure, yeah, and that would obviously have huge implications for our work and for many of our supporters.
Okay, well, let's move on. This time last year, when we looked ahead to 2023, we were expecting to see proposals for new laws on conversion therapy. A year on, they haven't properly materialised, but that doesn't mean nothing's been happening. Far from it. And joining us now is Joanna Cook from our Public Affairs team, who I'm sure many of you will recognise as one of our regular news readers, but her main job is as part of the team keeping on top of developments on this conversion therapy issue. Joanna, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, the Westminster draft bill that we expected last year, we're still waiting for that. But there's a whole lot of stuff has been going on. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, that's right. The Westminster government remains committed to bringing forward a draft bill for pre-legislative scrutiny. But in addition to that, we have two private members' bills, one beginning in the House of Lords, introduced by Lib Dem peer Baroness Burt of Solihull. We expect that to be debated in February, encompasses the whole of the UK. And the second private members' bill was actually tabled by Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle. And that bill hasn't actually been published yet.
No, we haven't seen that yet, have we?
No, but we expect it to be debated in March. But what we have done is we've taken legal advice on Baroness Burt's bill. Leading KC Jason Koppel is very clear that the bill would interfere with rights under the European Convention.
But just stepping back for a moment, private members' bills don't generally become law, it's fair to say.
Yeah.
But it's fair to say, I think, isn't it, that these can be used as a mechanism to put pressure onto the government, so when they do come out with this long-awaited draft bill, that it's rather worse than we would hope.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's about exerting pressure on the government, their declaration of intent, and they're about really kind of building momentum for the campaign for a bill, and that's why we have to fight these bills all the way.
So that's Westminster.
Yes.
Scotland, that's a different area, different process. What's going on there?
Well, the Scottish Government has just announced that it will be publishing its consultation on conversion therapy on the 9th of January, and that's with a view to bringing forward legislation. That is a public consultation, so it will run for 12 weeks, and is really key for supporters in Scotland, Christians in Scotland, to be engaging with the legislative process. That's their opportunity to really make their concerns known, and so we will be issuing guidance on how to respond to the consultation.
So there's the government draft bill, which be England and Wales. There's
Yes.
the Baroness Burt bill, which is UK. There is the Russell Moyle bill, which we've not seen yet. Scotland's doing something separate. What's happening in Northern Ireland? What's happening in the Republic of Ireland?
Well, in Northern Ireland, several MLAs have said that should the executive, on its return, not approve plans for a conversion therapy bill, then they'll bring forward a private member's bill
So we can
on
expect
conversion
another
therapy.
private member's bill.
That's
there,
right. And then in the Republic, a draft bill is currently being prepared ahead of pre-legislative scrutiny by a parliamentary committee, and that is expected to be in January. So we do expect some sort of call for evidence by the committee.
I suppose in all these areas there'll be different ways to engage with the legislative processes. We'll keep supporters up to date as and when those things become clear. Just remind us though, Joanna, why is this so important? We're fighting this on a number of fronts. It's taking a lot of time and a lot of resources. We've been doing it for quite a long time. Just remind everybody why it's so significant.
It's so significant because abusive and coercive practices are already illegal, but what this legislation threatens to target is just the ordinary work of churches and everyday parenting, and that's what we're really concerned about, and is why that we set up the Let Us Pray campaign to really protect everyday church activity and parenting from an overly broad conversion therapy ban.
To just go a little bit more into the issue for parents, because a lot of it hangs upon what they can and can't say to their children, doesn't it? Which seems terribly intrusive.
Yeah, it's just having conversations about sexual ethics, about gender. Say a gender-confused child comes to their parents, it could put limits on what parents could say to their children, what advice that they can offer. These are everyday things that parents talk about with their children, and we're really concerned that a bill could cut across that.
So what can people expect to see from the Christian Institute and the Let Us Pray campaign on these different areas?
Well, as you said, we will be providing guidance to our supporters on how best to engage with the legislative process. It's really key that people do use the opportunities such as the call for evidences, the consultations, to make their concerns known, because it does make a difference. So we need people to be actually engaging and acting on the issue. So that's our job, is to try and simplify it to make it as easy as possible to respond. So just be following the Let Us Pray campaign, be signed up to the Christian Institute, because we'll be sending out letters and emails and really walking our supporters through how to engage. Fantastic,
thanks so much. Dave, this is a significant issue, isn't it? We spent a lot of time on it. And it has had a fair amount of media coverage, but if you're somebody who's watching BBC or ITV, you'd probably have a very different perspective on it than what Joanna's just laid out for us in terms of the impact on the ordinary work of churches and on parenting, because people hear the words conversion therapy, and certainly this is how it's portrayed in mainstream media. They are thinking electric shock therapy. They're thinking the awful term corrective rape. people need to perhaps rethink how they're thinking about these things.
That's right. I mean, and those practices, as Joanna said earlier, abusive practices and so on are already illegal. What we're talking about here is something very different. And you have to really closely look at what activists are calling for to see that they're very much going for the ordinary work of churches.
Yeah, Jane Ozanne talked about banning
gentle non-coercive prayer. Exactly right. And the gold standard for a conversion therapy ban that many of these activists point to is the ban in Victoria. Australia. And as we've sought to expose in various briefings on that really does intrude right into religious practice. There's guidance from the Equal Opportunities Commission there, which has part of the responsibility for enforcing the law on how people should pray. What kind of prayers you can pray for someone who comes to you.
Would the Lord's Prayer be covered by criminal law?
Exactly, because the one that calls for a ban is on repentance.
Humanist UK here have talked about including that in the ban.
That's right. Very concerning, and the media narrative just doesn't reflect what is actually being called for and the implications it would have for Christians.
Thanks. Okay, well, again, let's move on. A lot to cover, a little bit of time. We can give thanks, Dave, can't we, that it's in the UK presently, it's still illegal to help someone to kill themselves. But the pressure to change the law has really ramped up, even at the very end of last year. Just sort of walk us through the different jurisdictions on this again. I know it's quite complicated.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there's been huge media coverage, often high-profile individuals talking about their own position and desire for the law to be changed and so on, and that can often influence how people think about it, at least at a superficial level. Although we do know that when they really engage with the arguments, that those things change, when they really understand how it could affect the vulnerable, which is particularly where these laws do have such horrendous implications, as we're seeing in Canada. There's been Westminster, which we're covering in Wales. There's been a committee looking at the issue. We're expecting them to report probably early in the new year. Scotland, where we're expecting a private member's bill to be brought forward there, probably in the first half of 2024. I mean, it's difficult to say though, because that bill from Liam MacArthur has been expected for quite a while.
Quite a long time. We're probably talking about that this time last
year. Probably. And then you've got the Isle of Man, which has actually voted for assisted suicide in principle. So that's passed its equivalent of second reading there and is now being considered by a committee, and that committee is due to report in the coming weeks.
As I said, the pro-assisted suicide campaign really does seem to have ramped up quite a lot in recent weeks. There's been votes on this in the past. There was a wonderful victory at Westminster in 2015. There's been a couple of votes in Scotland, and every time it's been knocked back. People might think, well, we've been here before and it's been okay. They'd be wrong to think that, wouldn't they? There does seem to be much more pressure just now.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of water under the bridge since 2015, different makeup of the various assemblies. We can't bank on those previous successes. There's a whole new generation of politicians really that need to hear the arguments and be won over.
And just set out for us clearly what the major arguments are. I mean, you touched on Canada. So how does that help us understand what could be happening here?
Well, Canada is a classic example of a jurisdiction that introduced a law allowing assisted suicide with certain so-called safeguards. But those safeguards...
Emphasis on the so-called there.
So-called, absolutely. Those safeguards were quickly eroded.
But that's not unique to Canada, is it? Because, I mean, we saw exactly the same thing with, let's say, the Netherlands. It's been more established there, and it's, in a sense, it's taken longer, but Canada just shows
how quickly it happened. It was only 2016 they legalised it, and already in a few years, some of the criteria have been dropped.
I mean, they're already talking about introducing for mental health conditions.
Yes, that's right. I think there's already been a vote in favour of that in principle, and that's just a question of when that comes in. And Belgium, we've seen the same there. They now allow child euthanasia. So every jurisdiction really where we've seen these laws introduced on assisted suicide euthanasia, the number of people and who are seeking death in that way increases year on year, and the criteria just are eroded over time as well. So
Ireland have got a bill that's going through committee as well at the moment.
Yeah.
It's worth talking about that. They're probably even further down the tracks than, say, Scotland and certainly Westminster.
Yes, they've been taking lots of evidence there, and there's been, I think, a healthy amount of pushback against the plans, which has been good to see. And I think we've highlighted various of those examples of that evidence on our news reporting on our website. And it's important that those voices are heard, and particularly that those voices are heard in the media. As we said, there's been a huge push on the other side in favour of assisted suicide, and there needs to be more media presence for our side of the argument.
Because as you said earlier on, when people start to scratch below the surface of some of the emotive stories and they start to realise about the burdens it is going to be placing on elderly and frail and vulnerable people, there's a real almost the so-called right to die then very quickly becomes a duty to die.
That's right. There's an onus and a burden that's then put on people, is that if it's an option that they could choose, there becomes an expectation that perhaps they should choose it. And that expectation, it could be coming from external pressure, maybe family members put that pressure on, or there's an internal sense that I am being a burden to my family, to the healthcare provision. I need to step off the stage, as it were.
Well, we talked about Canada, and there's been numerous examples there of where, broadly speaking, we're not able to provide whatever level of care it is that you think you might need. But have you thought about assisted suicide?
Yeah,
that must place huge pressure, and there's pressure on the governments that introduce this, in terms of cost pressures, because it's cheaper to, bluntly, awfully, it's cheaper to kill people than it is to look after them properly.
Yeah, that's right. And that not looking after people properly, I think, is a huge factor in the calls around assisted suicide, because if we had high quality palliative care available to everybody that needs it.
And the UK is very good on palliative
yes,
care.
but it's still patchy.
Yeah.
And it needs to be the case that high quality palliative care is available to all. And then you feel that so many of the situations that we see that are used to call for assisted suicide could be resolved through proper palliative care.
Okay, well, let's just stay in this area of sanctity of life and talk a little bit about abortion. There's a challenge to the law. There was huge amounts of controversy around censorship zones back in 2023. We can expect to see some more of that. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so let's take the legal framework as a whole. There are currently amendments to the Criminal Justice Bill going through at Westminster in the House of Commons there. Amendments have been tabled by a couple of backbench Labour MPs to essentially decriminalise abortion. There are slight nuances in how those amendments work, but they're really driving at the same conclusion. And the thing is that as soon as you start to unravel the existing framework, it'll probably all fall. And so we can expect either of the amendments that are currently tabled ultimately will lead to decriminalisation of abortion up to birth. And that's, I think, what those advocates, if you really found out what they wanted, that would be what they're calling for.
And what about the censorship zones then?
Yeah, so I mean it depends on jurisdiction again, doesn't it? So we've seen laws introduced in Northern Ireland already. We're seeing there's a consultation just closed in Scotland on a private member's bill there. And that private member's bill does have Scottish Government support, so is likely to reach the statute book. And there's a consultation at the moment at Westminster on how censorship zones will be implemented in England and Wales.
Because some of the language that gets talked about around this affects people who are praying silently, and sort of whatever you think about sort of people protesting outside of abortion centres or near abortion centres or what have you, the idea that somebody could be be fined or prosecuted in some way for what's going on in their head seems shocking. But also there's wording which would appear to reach into private residences.
That's right. So in some of these jurisdictions, typically you're talking about 100, 150 or 200 metre radius around an abortion clinic or a hospital where abortions are conducted, being the censorship zone. And within that zone, you're not able to do anything, usually uses the term influence. You're not allowed to influence someone with regards to abortion. And it extends to things that are visible in public within the zone, even if, so say a poster in a private home that is putting a pro-life message, if someone on the way to abortion clinic could see that within the zone, then he could be deemed to be influencing with regards to abortion. So yeah, it's very much reaching into the home. And probably the most dangerous aspect of the Scottish proposal is the power for Scottish ministers to be able to extend the radius of the zone without any upper limit, at their discretion, essentially. So it could end up with huge portions of Scotland covered by.
But there was a time, wasn't there, when not that long ago, when even evangelicals were perhaps indifferent to abortion, or even supportive of abortion, having sort of bought this lie that it's just a clump of cells rather than a human being created in the image of God. And we can give thanks that certainly times have changed as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on again to a final issue. There's so many things we could talk about, but I want to finish on the area of education, massive area for the Christian Institute. There was some helpful news out of Westminster government at the back end of last year. So let's just talk about that before we sort of move on to some of the issues that are going to be cropping up in the next 12 months.
Yep, so this is the guidance on gender questioning children in schools, and we've been waiting for that guidance for a long time. Been repeatedly promised and repeatedly delayed, but we now have the draft that is subject to consultation. And we have welcomed it as a significant step forward, while also believing that more could be done.
So what are the good things that are in there?
I think even the language, calling it gender questioning children rather than say trans children, is welcome and helpful. That's right. It's showing really that this is an ideology and it's not something that should be accepted and taught in schools. There are provisions in the guidance assuring schools that they're well within their rights to have single-sex spaces. In fact, they should have single-sex spaces.
That protects girls from having boys in their changing rooms and toilets and so on. Yeah.
That's right. There are also provisions in there to prevent parents, or teachers rather, or pupils being required to use so-called preferred pronouns. So that's important from the point of view of compelled speech. And just the general tone of the guidance in terms of not accepting gender ideology as fact. So this is all really important.
It's consultation on it though. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So again, it's subject to change. Important that we as Christians are pushing in the right direction, welcoming the good things and pushing for even better things, because we know that there will be activists on the other side who are calling for negative changes.
It's worth letting people know that we helped more than 200 parents, teachers, head teachers and governors last year. We can expect there to be more people who need our help in the year to come. So if that applies to any of you and you have questions over perhaps this guidance or some other issues that we're going to come on to in the area of some form of sex education or to do with Pride Weeks or so on and so forth, then do get in touch with our education team. They're there to help. And I do want to bring us on then to the very broad and complex issue of sex ed. I'm going to use sex ed as the kind of a catch-all term. We're expecting consultation in England on RSHE. It was good that the Education Minister, Gillian Keegan, wrote to schools recently in terms of that whole issue about ability to see materials. That was helpful, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's important that that parents are aware of that and that they do insist on their rights to be able to see materials.
That's going to be one of our themes, I think, about this area is just encouraging parents in particular, teachers also, but parents in particular, to engage well with schools in whichever jurisdiction that they're in, to raise concerns, to be informed, and we'll help people to be informed, but to raise concerns, but have a positive relationship with their schools, to be involved and come, not always coming with a complaint, but coming with because they're informed and they want the school to improve, and showing their concern for their children's education. Scotland, we're expecting a final version of guidance on RSHP guidance there. I don't know what we can expect from that in terms of how good or bad it will be. I guess, as all these things, could be a mixed bag.
Yes, that's right. I mean, certainly there were good things in the draft, and we commended those. We also suggested some points for improvement. We'll just have to see how many of those are taken on board.
Consultations, post-primary consultations in Ireland for people to engage with there. It's important that people make their views known. We're expecting a public consultation on the new curriculum for primary schools. So lots going on in Ireland. Mm-hmm. Wales has kind of been a bit further down the track, but importantly, changes that were made a couple of years ago are likely to start rolling out to sort of year 10 pupils there. So again, it's not too late for, I'm going to say it again, for parents to engage with schools there. And again, at the time, I think it's important to remind people of the kind of conversations that were had at the time, where the minister and the guidance was saying it's very important that schools engage with parents. We want to see two-way communication channels, all that sort of stuff. I guess I'm at risk of repeating myself. Parents need to take the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's finish with Northern Ireland. There's various things going on there. Can you talk us through some of that?
Yeah, so Northern Ireland, as people may remember, had new sex education requirements imposed on them by Westminster, and those are now moving towards being implemented. So there was a consultation late last year on new regulations, which are really about this whole area, including the statutory right to withdraw, parents to withdraw their children. There are new resources in the works there from the Curriculum and Assessments Council in Northern Ireland, which schools are not required to use, but they're likely to use them and will certainly be influential.
And again, in all these things, there's a guidance anyway says schools should consult with parents.
Yep.
So parents need to take this opportunity to make their good and bad concerns known. If
really
there's
helps
something
to shape
that's good
the
in
RSE
there,
policy.
if there's something that's good in there, it's important to say this is good. Please keep it. And if there's something they're concerned about, to make that known as well. Well, Dave, thank you very much. That's probably all we've got time for.
Sure.
Thank you very much for going into so much detail on such a broad range of issues. If you want to know any more about any of those issues and more, go to our website, christian.org.uk. If you're not already signed up to our mailing list, I'd encourage you to do that. Details are on the screen. Hopefully we'll see many of you at the hundreds of church meetings we'll be carrying out this year. And also do please continue to pray for us. As you've heard there's an awful lot of issues that we're going to be covering. Please pray for us as we seek to bring glory to God in this difficult work. Thank you. Goodbye.
For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.